Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Campbell Black. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm Cameron Randle. I'm rector of St. George's Church and St. James Church on the eastern shore of Virginia. My wife, Angelica, and I have been over on the eastern shore now, having moved from Los Angeles 2.5 years. It's remarkable to us that it's gone that quickly. We love living on the shore, but I will candidly admit to you that living on the shore and coming over to the Richmond area, coming to Midlothian, is like a bit of a vacation. No shame in that. But it brings to mind the Holy Trinity deciding where to go for vacation. And I think of God asking Jesus, where do you want to go for vacation this summer? Shall we go to Rome? Jesus said, no. Rome's a little spotty, and kind of a rocky relationship with Rome. I said, well, okay, how about Jerusalem? Do you want to go to Jerusalem? He goes, oh, no, I have the worst experience. God said then, well, what about Southern Virginia? We could go to Southern Virginia and take one of those tours of the historical Episcopal churches in Virginia. And the Holy Spirit piped up and said, that's a great idea. I've never been to an Episcopal church. We give ourselves a hard time on occasion, and others, as you know, certainly do, about being perhaps less sensitive to areas of evangelism and growth, areas including new community that are directly, of course, respondents to the presence of the Holy Spirit, which we know is very much in our church and in our parishes. The bishop mentioned earlier a culture of death that sets a tone for a lot of our conversation, including our conversations about new communities. If you'd permit me to be a bit more specific, a survey was conducted nationally 3 years ago in 2010. Very extensive survey looking at information about our National Episcopal Church and all of our parishes. A couple of things to note relative to that culture of death. One is that 3 years ago, the median age in the Episcopal Church was 57. 3 years ago. What that tells us is statistically, unless there are changes in the next few years, it says that over the course of the next 16 years from now, 50% of all presently living Episcopalians will be dead. 16 years. That gives us a visual image of our church. First one. The visual image of the church in the future can be grim. But I suggest to you that that really can be confined to one end of the spectrum of our conversation, particularly our conversation about new communities. Yes, we're aware of the potential gravity of the future if we don't branch out and create new communities, if we don't incorporate others into our existing parishes. But at the same time, we know on the other end of the spectrum that it is inherent in our Great Commission to grow new communities, regardless of what statistics tell us today. And we know that the presence of the Holy Spirit is in, fundamentally, that Great Commission, inherent in that process. And so as we look at this future, I suggest we look at that just for a moment, for statistical information, and then shift our focus to the positive, which is the empowerment of the Holy Spirit as we all move forward collectively into that Great Commission of establishing new communities. And with that in mind, I would like to suggest this morning that we take a very cursory peek at a very interesting man, Martin Buber. Martin Buber was a Jewish philosopher. He came from Holland, but lived the majority of his life in Israel and was a founder of Hebrew University. He started And he stepped out of the arena of Hebrew studies, and under the influence of philosophers like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, he began to look at what he called Hebrew humanism. He said, I am an experiential philosopher. I don't write about ideas, he said. I write about human experience. And Buber's influence in the realm of describing human existence and human experience in one particular way still resonates with us. But before we look at that notion which he called I, thou, before we take a look for a moment at I, thou, if you are of a certain age, if you came up in the 70s or in the 80s, please permit me to offer a warning. It's important, I think, as we look at Buber, to distinguish between Buber and Billy Gibbons of the rock group ZZ Top. There are uncanny physical familiarities between the two, but they are distinct. Now, I will tell you that the members of ZZ Top do have their own moral philosophy, and on occasion it does dovetail with Martin Buber's, but it also ranges far afield. So, just a caution. As we look at Buber, and we look at his concept of I, thou, what Buber said, and bear in mind, we're thinking of this particularly in the context of the new communities within our church. Buber said, all human existence derives its meaning from relationships. Relationships are where we go to extract real meaning in our lives. And he framed this conversation by saying, the relationships that we are going to have with one another are going to be in one of two fashions. They're either going to be an I-thou relationship, or they're going to be an I-it relationship. And in the I-it relationship, Buber says, here's what's really going on. There's no real dialogue between human beings in an I-it relationship. He said, rather, there's a monologue going on. When two things happen, when we look at another human being and say, I'm willing to experience the interaction with this human being, and secondly, I'll look at that experience as a way potentially to find something useful for my own life. Experience and use, he said. If that's what we're looking at in our interaction with another human being, that is an I-it relationship. We are basically making that other person an object. We are objectifying the other person and saying, this person is going to give me an experience or give me something that I can find useful. And that will be the extent of our relationship. A couple of weeks ago, Angelica and I and our daughter were driving in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I won't say where, but we were driving in the Commonwealth. We pulled up to an intersection, and here's the bumper sticker that was on the truck in front of us. Have you seen this bumper sticker? This is in the vehicle in front of us. I did a double take, I'll admit to you. Am I seeing what I really think I'm seeing? Here is an I-it relationship. Here is an extreme example of objectifying another human being. This person on the right is no longer a husband, no longer a father, no longer an elected official. This person now is categorized as a liar, someone different from us. We don't lie. It's wrong to lie. But this person is a liar. This person is an African, foreign and exotic to us. This person also is associated by reference subtly with an animal. This person is not only a liar and not only an African, but is essentially subhuman. Here's an I-it relationship in the extreme and very intentional form. So Buber says, I-it is available to us anytime we want to pursue an I-it relationship. But he said the true meaning of life for human beings is to be found in an I-thou relationship. And I-thou says says the most important thing to accomplish is what he calls the melting of the between. What a great phrase. The melting of the between. Let's dissolve whatever wall or whatever obstacle comes between us. And he said it's important to know that as we engage in an I-thou relationship, there are potentially no parameters, potentially no borders in dealing with one another. If we're involved in an I-it relationship, we have our guard up. We have our parameters clearly established going into it. But in an I-thou relationship, we are seeking to melt that which comes between us and to potentially have no boundaries, no parameters. This accomplishes something beyond just our connection with one another. The next slide. Every relationship, Buber says, every relationship brings us ultimately into relationship with God, who is the eternal thou. Every time we choose to disengage from an I-it relationship and to embrace an I-thou relationship, every time we do that is a particle of experience that actually moves us closer and closer and closer to God, who is the eternal thou. In the process of doing that, particularly in the context of new communities, I'm very affected by Henri Nouwen. You have fans of Henri? Great leader, writer, Catholic, Roman Catholic priest from Holland, who was a great writer and leader, particularly in the realm of pastoral care. And Henri Nouwen has said, look, we are all engaged as Christians, as people of faith, in the process of reconciling with other people and in the process of healing. If you're a Christian, you're involved in healing. But Nouwen says, let's be careful to remember that there can be a great danger that in those acts and in those words and in those expressions of caring that we bring very intentionally but very well intentioned to others in need can be the danger of those healing exercises becoming more about power than about our providing service. When we look at the source of new communities, I don't know about your parishes, but we interact a good bit with folks who are outside the church. Our new communities tend to come from people who are unchurched. They come from people who are disenchanted or have had negative experiences previously in church. There are those who have no preference at all, but are wildly interested, those who are interested in community service and accomplishing something good and are willing to meet us halfway, despite the fact that we're a church, not because we're a church. There are new areas like immigrants. Whatever our source for new communities, I think it's important for us to realize, particularly when we're engaged in community service, in food pantries, in work with the homeless. Anytime we're involved in trying to minister, again, fully well-intentioned, to the underserved, be mindful of Nouwen's, which is in effect a warning against an unintentional I-it relationship. Nouwen says, be careful. The Obama example is a clear indication of somebody who planned on exhibiting an I-it relationship. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's possible for us as people of faith engaged in genuine, legitimate acts of healing to unintentionally enter into I-it relationships because we have the power, because we're bringing the food to the hungry, because we're bringing clothes to the homeless, shelter to the homeless. We're bringing truth and teaching to those who may not have grown up in a church structure. The importance of I-it, I-thou to Buber is such that he says all went to undergraduate school at Oral Roberts University in the mid-70s. That's a whole other conversation. But I can tell you that at Oral Roberts, there was a great deal of emphasis then on evangelizing, on saving souls. And you would hear students ask each other, how many souls did you save? How many of these events have you been involved in recently? And I had a friend in my dormitory who began to return after the weekend to campus. He would come into the dorm on Sunday nights and he would say, Paul, how was your weekend? And he'd say, it was great, I got saved again. And he said that every Sunday night. And how was your camping trip? Great, I got saved again. How was the concert? Great, I got saved again. Over and over. That was his cynical response to what was really the objectification of that process of sharing the gospel. So we're all subject, if we don't monitor ourselves very carefully, to stepping into I-it territory when we really need to be in I-thou territory. Now, if the language of Jewish moral philosophy from a book written in 1923 is not your comfort zone necessarily, I would suggest a shortcut for accessing that notion of I-thou. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. This Judeo-Christian directive, if followed, particularly in the charting of new communities, will lead us down that path directly toward I-thou and keep us very clear of I-it. Martin Buber, I-thou or I-it as we grow new communities. Thank you. Questions? Okay, thank you. Would you mind stepping up?
No, I'm
Just stepping up where we can make sure everyone hears.
Am I being recorded?
I have a small task to perform here.
I teach intercultural communication at Long University, and one of the ways that I find that sometimes my students fall into the trap of the unintentional I-it is actually through the golden rule, which is do unto others, right? So one of our theorists offers this version of it, which is do unto others as they would have done unto themselves, which for me requires communication, because you're not projecting onto the other person what you want, but you're actually engaging in the I-thou and trying to discover what their needs are. So we have that switch, now I'm not getting rid of the golden rule, by the way. But I think it's a switch for my students. It's switching perspective to imagine that we have to engage, and I-thou requires dialogical communication at its best when we are met.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. It underscores exactly that distinction that Buber makes between the dialogue, that's the exact word you're using, the dialogue in an I-thou relationship. It's two entities experiencing one another. And remember, human existence is all about experience. But he said, in I-it, that's not what's going on. It appears to be a dialogue, but it is in fact a monologue. It's all about I and an I-it, and not about I-thou. Thank you. Others? I think it's important to, yes, sir.
I was thinking of, this is not going to be an answer, it's going to be a question. English lacks the intimate form that other languages contain. For example, if I use the word tu in French, that's an intimate thou. That's a thou. English doesn't have that. We even have a language issue because you could be any number of meanings when you use the word you.
you know how someone is approaching you from the very outset with those language skills. The dilemma that you referred to is illustrated by the fact that there was an ongoing discussion, and very heated at times, between Buber and the publishers, because when it came to publishing I, thou in English, there was a move to publish it as I, you. They were saying, no, we can't do I, you, it's got to be I, thou. Even though thou feels perhaps a little more stilted, thou carries the respect, the mutuality, and the reverence that we don't get necessarily from the formality of the you. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm struggling with the issue of, for instance, if I want to request a parishioner to be a vestry member or to be on a committee, I'm looking for something from that person. How do you maintain an I-thou relationship when you want something?
I would suggest that exclusivity is part of the answer to that. Is it exclusively that you are after something? Then there's the issue. Is the relationship with them ancillary, and by a great wide margin, is it ancillary to the fact that you exclusively, first and foremost, want something from them and nothing else matters? Then it's problematic. But there's a legitimacy, absolutely, to wanting something from someone, particularly in that context, because it's something that will contribute to the greater good and really contribute to the dialogue. Right? I don't know any other way than to start with that issue of exclusivity. Okay? Cannon Black says we're done with Cannon Randle. I do want to just note, one of the things that touched me about Buber's I, thou was him saying, by the way, I, thou does not involve us activating and initially pursuing God through human beings as the ultimate thou. He said, rather, be open to receiving